First up was Chris Albert. The prosecutor asked who he lived with. Listen to his answer.
I live with my wife, Julie, my oldest son, who just came home from the Navy, my middle son, Colin, and my youngest son, Dylan.
Did you catch how he injected that his son came home from the Navy? It just flowed too, so you know he's used this before. Chris testified that John O'Keefe became his neighbor and that's how he knew him. The prosecution asked about the relationship. Chris said John knew people that he knew and that John used to take John's nephew to his pizza place. So we're not hearing him describe a friendship or a relationship. This is someone he knew. Chris's siblings are his older brother Brian, older sister Kathleen, younger brother Kevin, younger brothers Keith, Brendan, and Timmy. Brian was a police officer. He recently retired. Brother Kevin is a Canton police officer. Chris said that Officer O'Keefe brought his nephew to Chris's pizza place on January 28th. He testified he suggested to O'Keefe that he come out later to celebrate his nephew Brian Jr.'s birthday. Listen to the Q&A here.
In that sense, sort of, how would you describe your relationship with Mr. O'Keefe?
Oh, it was a good relationship, yeah.
Would you consider yourself friends?
Yeah, absolutely.
Suddenly they're friends. That's not how he described it earlier. Chris testified he left work at the pizza place before it closed, so that would be a little before 10 o'clock. Chris said O'Keefe texted him asking him where he was. He said he went to Waterfall just before 10. The McCabe's were there, his wife was there, Nicole was there, and his niece Caitlin. Chris's brother Brian is married to Jen McCabe's sister, Nicole. Then the two Brians showed up. That's Chris's brother, Brian Albert, and Brian's friend, Brian Higgins. You know, Brian Higgins, who showed up at the police station after 1 a.m. later that same night. Brian Higgins, close friends with Brian Albert, whose front lawn was where Officer O'Keefe was found. The same Brian Higgins who appeared to have injected himself into the investigation. Brian Higgins, whose address in police reports was listed as the police station, something only done with officers officially involved in a call in a professional capacity. That Brian Higgins. Listen to Chris's answer to this next question.
And is Brian Higgins, is that someone that you had met previously?
Yeah, a few times.
And how did you know him?
I don't know how I initially met him, but probably just seen him around. I knew that he worked as an ATF agent. I knew that he worked inside the Canton Police Department, so I think I knew him from that, just being around.
Chris said John and Karen arrived after he did. He said Reed had a drink in a glass hidden in her jacket. Interestingly, he didn't refer to her as Karen or Miss Reed. He referred to her as the defendant. And he did it again.
I think the defendant sat down, and I think John went to the bar and got a beer.
He said everyone was having a good time. Everything was fine. There were no arguments between anybody. He said there was talk of going to his pizza place or 234 Fairview. He said that Reed wanted to go to the pizza place, and the prosecution brought this out another time too, so it makes me wonder if it's going to somehow play into what picture that the prosecution wants to paint. Chris's wife left early. She had a headache. Chris said he bought a round of fireballs for the group, but only about half of the people there took one. He said he left the bar around the same time as Karen and John. He said John was drinking beer. He was asked what Reed was drinking. Here's his answer.
Just a clear liquid in a glass. I assume it was some sort of vodka drink.
Was that the same glass that she had come into the establishment with under her coat, or was it a different glass later on?
I believe it was the same one.
He said he got home somewhere around 12:05 or 12:10. Colin Albert was at 34 Fairview. The way Chris said it was that, Colin was over there to celebrate Brian Jr.'s birthday. But later we'll learn that Chris's wife believed that Colin was at a friend's house, and it was only later that she learned he was at the Fairview address. Chris said that within 10 minutes of coming home, Colin came home. Considering that Colin was at Fairview and what time he got home matters, it now matters what time Chris got home because Colin's timeline is now tied into Chris's. Chris testified he woke up at around 8 or 8:30 on the 29th. His wife will testify she got up at about 8 or 8:30, went to Dunkin' Donuts, went to the Fairview address, stayed a half an hour, then went home and woke Chris up. Both can't be correct. Chris also said he woke up on his own, not that his wife woke him. He said his wife came into the room and told him that John had died.
I was in shock. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean? And then I jumped up and she's like, let's go over to your brother's house.
The jury hasn't heard it yet, but she had just come home from his brother's house. Why do they need to go there? If it's to offer support, why didn't his wife just phone him? And he jumped up. This is off. The prosecution asks what time this was and who was there when he got there. Listen to the way he answers and to who he names.
Sometime approximately like after 9 o'clock. I don't remember exactly what time we went over there, maybe 9 or 9:30.
And when you arrived at your brother's house, who, if anyone, was there?
To the best of my recollection, from what I remember, I was there. My wife was there, my brother Brian, Nicole, Brian Higgins was there. I believe Matt McCabe was there and Jen McCabe was there.
Brian Higgins. The rest of them were family. He says they stayed at Fairview for about an hour and then went back home. The defense brought out that Chris has close friends on the police force. Chris knows Courtney Proctor, the sister of the lead investigator on this case. The defense started getting into the relationships, Michael Proctor, that lead investigator, and the prosecution objected, and there was a long sidebar. The defense asks, who is Kenneth Berkowitz? Turns out he's the former police chief, and he and Chris know each other. They've been out for drinks together. They've known each other a long time, over 20 years. He donated money to Chris's campaign, and Chris just plays it down. The defense is asking, did you socialize? Did you attend events together? And he says, my campaign event. And he says, was he a supporter? And Chris says, he came by. Did he donate money? Well, actually, yeah, he did. The defense hands him a photograph of himself and Ken Berkowitz. And when the defense asks him, he refers to Ken Berkowitz as Kenny Berkowitz. Seems very familiar. The defense was able to get the witness to admit that he was childhood friends with Officer Lank. So yet another officer who was involved in the investigation. The defense gets the witness to say, he knew Michael Proctor prior to January 29th and that they've been to some social events together. And it's Michael Proctor who came to interview Chris. I mean, this is, wow. The prosecution kept objecting, so then they had another sidebar. And something interesting came out on cross. And that is that prior to January 28th, Chris and John did not have each other's phone numbers. Yet he describes himself as a friend. They had never socialized before. Wonder why he's suddenly inviting him out. The defense said you knew that Brian Albert, your brother, and Brian Higgins were friends, right? And Chris Albert was playing it down and I guess hedging their acquaintances. They were good friends. He finally admitted it.
Yeah, they're friends.
Was there something confusing about my question the first time I asked it?
Objection, Your Honor.
And the defense brought out the text that Chris sent to John O'Keefe. Listen to this.
9:45 p.m., you texted John O'Keefe while you were at the waterfall, correct?
Correct.
Would you agree with me that the language of your text was, quote, "Get over here or I'll fuck up your lawn," end quote?
What do you mean? I don't follow you.
It says "get over here," right? And then the second is a continuation of that. If not, I'm going to fuck up your lawn, correct?
So you mean that's to tell him to come over to the waterfall?
Right.
Okay, I just didn't understand what you meant.
That's fine. So you're telling John O'Keefe this, correct?
Yeah, I'm telling him to come over and meet us.
All right. And that little emoji, that face emoji after, if not, I'm going to fuck up your lawn, that's
Yeah,
essentially...
it's a laughing face.
Right, so you're
a joke.
saying that, you're cracking up.
Yeah, it's a joke.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay.
The defense brought out that Chris had a beer before he even left for the waterfall while he was at his own workplace, while he was cleaning up. Then he went to the waterfall. He was drinking there. And the way it was put is he went up to the bar more than once. He bought that round of fireballs for everybody. And the defense asked him, so do you feel like you were really drunk? How were you? And Chris says, well, no, I was fine.
Right. And in terms of Karen Reed's drinking, as far as you could see, she had that glass that she came in with that appeared to have a clear liquid in it, correct?
Correct.
And I believe you said either a lime or a lemon?
Thought I said a line, but yep.
Okay. And you assumed that was, vodka and soda water or vodka in some type of mixer, correct? That was clear?
Correct.
And if she was, while drinking that night, if she was mixing in water in between alcoholic drinks, it would have been impossible for you to discern which drinks were water and which drinks were vodka, correct?
Yeah, I would have no idea.
You can't tell that by eyeballing a drink, right?
No.
Because both liquids are clear.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
in order to discern that, you'd actually have to be given a sip to see, right? Okay. But in any case, Karen did not appear to be under the influence of alcohol to you.
I didn't notice anything.
She wasn't stumbling, correct?
Nope.
She wasn't swaying.
I didn't notice.
She didn't appear to be unbalanced, correct?
I didn't notice anything.
She wasn't slurring her words.
Nope.
She wasn't talking gibberish, correct?
No.
She was engaging in normal conversation and she appeared to be under control.
So again, another witness who says that there was no indicia that Karen Reed was inebriated.
Okay. And from your observations of Karen Reed that night, and you were there probably over 2 hours, were you not?
Total? About that, yeah.
Yeah. From your observations of Karen that night, you would have had no problem with her driving a car, correct?
I wouldn't even have thought about it.
I wouldn't have even thought of it. Well, you can take that two ways. You can take it as he doesn't care about that stuff. That wouldn't be something that he would think about. Or that Reed wasn't so inebriated that he thought, geez, maybe she shouldn't be driving. Clearly, her state did not stand out to him. The defense got into what time that Chris got home. Remember, Chris said 12:05, 12:10. And the reason this is important is not just for the timeline in general, where was everybody, but also where was Colin and what time was he there? And the defense shows this video.
Ms. Robert, you would agree with me this was clearly the end of the night?
Sure.
The lights are all on at this point.
Yes.
The bar appears to have largely emptied out.
Yes.
Okay, continue, please. Pause it. Oh, there we go. My co-counsel is much better at this than I am. Do you know?
I believe it's me.
Continue, please. Having now viewed that video with the timestamp of 12:13 and about 43 seconds or so, does that refresh your memory as to when you left the waterfall?
Yes,
That would mean it would have been impossible for you to get home to Maple Street by 12:05 or 12:10, correct?
correct.
Then they got into this big back and forth about how far away from home, how long would it take to walk from the waterfall to home, and it was very confusing. The point is, there's no way that Chris got home at 10 after 12. And as they were working through that, the judge interrupted and they had a sidebar.
So now, if you're leaving the bar at like close to 12:14, as indicated on the video, you're getting home somewhere around 12:19, 12:20, correct?
Roughly, yeah.
And what were you wearing that night?
Blue jeans, sneakers, I think, and like a sweatshirt,
Okay. And it had started to snow by that point.
a little bit.
So the ground was a little bit either slushy or wet.
Not slushy, but could have been wet.
Could have been wet.
Did you hear that? It wasn't even slushy yet. He's walking home, it's about 20 after 12, and there is not enough snow that it's even slushy yet. And at this time, so everybody's left the waterfall, the allegation is that Reed dropped off O'Keefe at Fairview, and that's when she ran him over. Except here, it's not snowing. There's not the buildup of snow, and I'm still hung up on the blood droplets that were on top of a big pile of snow that wasn't even there at the time Reed dropped him off. The defense brought out that by the time Chris got home, which was only a 5 to 7 minute walk away, he was wet because he didn't have a winter jacket on either. So he was wet very quickly. Chris testifies that when he got home, Julie was lying in bed. Chris testified that within about 15 minutes, he started to doze off. He's not sure what time he actually fell asleep, though. And if you wonder why the heck the defense is asking, when did you fall asleep? Well, where Colin was is pretty important, so this timeline is important. Then the defense goes through this thing. Okay, so you get home, it takes you, you kick off your shoes, it maybe takes you a minute to get up the stairs, and he's estimating the time it would take for him to get into bed and all of that, and he's being very generous to the witness in terms of how quickly he could do that. Then there's this exchange.
10 minutes after you got home, he opened the bedroom door.
I think that's what I said, yeah.
Do you want to stick with that?
I'm just trying to recollect what I, thinking it over, so obviously it was a little bit longer.
I almost laughed at this. Are you sure you want to stick with that? Is that your final answer? Lawyers and police officers do this, and it really makes people nervous.
Because you actually woke up when he opened the bedroom door, correct?
I don't think so.
Did you not just testify before this jury just, I don't know, maybe an hour ago, that you fell asleep and that your son Colin opened the bedroom door and woke you up to say goodnight?
Yeah, I guess that's what I said.
Okay. And when you testified to that on direct examination, that was when Mr. Lally was asking you questions, correct?
Correct.
And you knew that you were under oath at that time, correct?
Correct.
And you were trying to be as accurate as possible, correct?
Trying to be, correct.
All right. So in terms of the timing of this, assuming that he opened the bedroom door after you already fell asleep, if you're getting home upstairs to your bedroom around 12:20 and it takes you 15 minutes to go to bed, and that's around 12:35, then sometime after you're asleep, after 12:35, that's when Colin opens the bedroom door, correct?
I don't remember exactly.
Well, it's difficult for you to remember how long you'd been asleep for when Colin opened the bedroom door, correct?
Correct.
You don't know if it was 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or longer, correct?
I don't know exactly.
Right. But it was some time after you fell asleep.
To the best of my recollection.
Youch. Good job by the defense here.
Can you explain for the jury who or what is Nebercracker?
What is Nebercracker?
Yes,
Like the character?
that's what I'm asking.
It's a character in a cartoon called Monster House.
And would you agree with me that Nebercracker in the movie Monster House was this kind of old curmudgeon who didn't want anybody on his lawn, correct?
The character, yes.
He was the get off my lawn guy, correct?
In the movie, yeah.
What was your nickname and your wife Julie's nickname for John O'Keefe?
Mr. Nebercracker.
All right. And your wife Julie actually had John O'Keefe plugged into his contacts as Nebercracker, correct?
Correct.
In fact, you were there one time when Julie showed Karen Reed, her phone to show how John O'Keefe was plugged in as Nebercracker, correct?
I believe so.
And this whole nickname started because of a conflict that Colin Albert had with John O'Keefe.
Not correct.
John O'Keefe complained to you about things that Colin was doing.
Not correct.
He would tell you that Colin used to throw beer cans or beer bottles in his bushes, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
No, you can answer that. What's your answer to that?
That is not correct.
John O'Keefe told you that Colin used to flip him off, correct?
Not correct.
And say F you to him.
Never.
Colin used to cut through his yard.
Nope, that was Dylan.
You knew that John didn't like people cutting through his yard, correct?
No, I don't know that to be true.
He doesn't know that to be true, yet he calls him Nevercracker. Really? And look at how defensive he is. Don't tell me that he would not defend Colin or any other family member if he needed to. What follows is a discussion about an incident and the behavior of Chris and Julie Albert. I think this is important to leave in because it shows, first of all, the kind of behavior this man engages in. It's a kind of F-U, rubbing it in John O'Keefe's face. And his attitude, his contempt and disdain for John O'Keefe. I think this matters a lot. And remember at the beginning, we were friends. Absolutely.
There was a time when John O'Keefe was not home that you and your wife Julie went to his house.
That is correct.
And you entered onto his property, correct?
On his front property, yes.
And you had drinks in your hand.
Correct.
And you thought it would be funny to have a photo taken of you and your wife with drinks in your hand on his property, correct?
Correct.
And you knew it would be funny because you knew it would annoy him, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
Oh, you can go ahead. Can you answer that?
Yeah, he was actually asking us to watch his house while he was away.
Right, but that doesn't answer my question, which was he didn't ask you to go onto his property with drinks in your hand and take a photo, correct?
He asked us to watch his property.
You know those people who you give them permission to do one thing and then they take all kinds of liberties, or they use that permission to justify all kinds of other things that they want to do and can somehow twist around to blame you and exonerate themselves? Yeah, just because he was watching his property, therefore he could take those liberties. He could do that when he knows that, he's calling him Nevercracker, so he's going to do that.
Okay, but again, in answer to my question, the answer is no, he did not ask us to go on his property and take pictures of ourselves with drinks in our hand, correct?
Yeah, he didn't ask me to send him a photo.
He didn't ask me to send him a photo. I mean, even when he's caught dead to rights on this thing, and it's not a big thing. He's not being accused of homicide here. He's being accused of going on his lawn and taking a picture and giving him a big F you. He doesn't want to look bad. So what does he do? He tries to minimize, oh, well, he didn't ask us to send a photo, when that wasn't the thing.
You would agree with me that Nevercracker wouldn't like a photo of somebody on his lawn with drinks in their hands, correct?
The cartoon character, Nevercracker?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain. Next question, please,
Yes.
Ms. Giannetti.
And back to Colin's whereabouts.
You previously confirmed that when you walked in your door on January 29th of 2022 after coming home from the waterfall, your son Colin was not home, correct?
That's correct.
At that time, you had no personal knowledge of where he had been that night, correct?
That's correct.
Since that time, you know that he was at your brother Brian's house that night, Brian Albert.
That's correct.
Your old home, correct?
Where I grew up, yep.
And you knew that address to be 34 Fairview Road.
Correct.
And you knew that that was the same house outside which John O'Keefe was found dead later that morning, correct?
Correct.
And here we go. So Chris knows how important it was to be accurate about the time. And it comes out now that at the time, Chris did not know that Colin was at Fairview. It was later he found out. But you know what? Nobody went and interviewed Chris. And that means that the family had time to get story straight. And this doozy right along the same lines.
When you spoke to Trooper Proctor on February 10th of 2022, you would agree with me that you never mentioned that Colin Albert was at your brother Brian's house that night, correct?
Objection, Your Honor.
I don't remember.
On redirect about the whole Nevercracker thing, Chris told this big story about how John yelled at the kids to get off the lawn and that John felt so bad about it that he went and bought candy and brought it over, and it was all just a big joke. The next witness was Julie Albert. And as to the parts of her testimony that I already referred to when we were looking at Chris Albert's testimony, I won't be repeating those bits. She agreed that everything seemed normal. She also said that Karen wanted to go to the pizza place, and she said that Chris came home at about 12:10. Well, what does that tell you? Or the defense has established that is impossible. Yet here she is making the exact same mistake, if it was indeed a mistake, as Chris Albert did. Does this not sound like a couple of people who got together and got their stories straight? That's what it stinks of to me. She said 10 to 15 minutes later, Colin came home. Are these two trying to protect their son, Colin? And she said, I do not go to bed until the kids come home. Yet Chris said she was already in bed. And as she describes Chris coming to bed, she describes herself as already in the bed. She said on Saturday morning she woke up at 8ish. We went through all this. She went to Dunkin' Donuts and everything. She saw she had a missed call from Jen McCabe at 5:55 a.m. She said she didn't talk to Jen at this time. She went to 34 Fairview to deliver the donuts. And she was asked, what did you notice when you were there? So remember, this is like 8:30, 9 o'clock. She says Jen McCabe's car was in the driveway and she doesn't recall anything going on there. Was the police tape all gone already by 9 o'clock? By 8:30? She says she went in the house. Inside were Nicole and Brian Higgins. And Jen McCabe and her husband were there. And Jen told her that John was in the hospital. She said she was there about a half an hour, and then she went home and woke up Chris and told him about it. Then they went back to the Fairview house. And she says they were only there about a half an hour. Well, what is this all about? And the prosecution asked a question of her. He said, a few days later, 2 state troopers came to your home to talk to you, right? Well, on cross-examination, the defense brought out, well, it wasn't actually a few days later. It was 13 days later. And then it comes out that nobody, no police officer, no investigator spoke to them at the time or got 2 weeks up until the state police came. The longest part of her testimony was about Michael Proctor. Michael Proctor is the brother of a very close friend of hers, Courtney. Julie's sister is also lifelong friends with Courtney. This witness regularly watched Proctor's children, like 2 days a week, regularly until COVID came. This witness has spent time at Mr. Proctor's childhood home. They've been to the pool. And guess who has been there too? Colin. So Colin also knows Michael Proctor. And through the course of questioning, the defense made it clear that they were friends and they were close friends. And she tried to play it down a little bit, but couldn't really deny it, right? She did state on the stand she rarely talks to Courtney by phone. And the defense says, well, isn't it true you were using Courtney as an intermediary to communicate with Michael Proctor about this investigation? Well, of course she's going to say no. Remember, she said she rarely talks to her by phone. Well, the defense produces phone records. Between February 1st, the day Karen Reed was arrested, and September 6th, Courtney Proctor and Julie Albert had 67 phone calls. And on the day that Karen Reed was arrested, there was a phone call between the two of them, 12 minutes. And of course, the witness says she doesn't remember what they talked about. On February 2nd, this witness spoke with Courtney 3 times before the public arraignment of Karen Reed, and then some more afterwards. And through this, the prosecution just kept objecting, and the judge interrupted and ended the day. That's all I've got for you for now. Trust your gut. See you in the comments.